husband let his son steal my late husband's ring and traumatized daughter, so I sold his dead wife's jewelry collection and set off a revenge chain that destroyed 3 generations of his family. My daughter Lisa and I have this morning ritual where we open my jewelry box together, and she asks when she'll get her daddy's ring. I always tell her when she turns 18, just like I was when Michael proposed. It's been our thing for 6 years since he passed away. Then I met and fell in love with Dan. We got married a year ago, and while he is genuinely wonderful to me, his son Tim is a different story. The kid's 22, lives with us rent-free, and I've paid for 2 DUI lawyers plus bail money. Yet he still treats me like I'm some gold digger who trapped his dad. He literally introduces me to his friends as Dad's rebound wife. I've tried so hard with this kid. I cook his favorite meals, offer to help with job applications, and give him space when he needs it. His response every single time is, "You're not my mother. Stop pretending you belong." Dan always defends him, saying he's still grieving. Give him time. Meanwhile, we're bleeding money because of Tim's legal problems, and I've had to dip into Lisa's college fund 3 times. Dan swears he'll pay it back, but that money never materializes. The disrespect kept escalating. Tim would take my car without asking and return it on empty with fast food trash everywhere. Dan would say he's testing boundaries. When Tim told my 11-year-old her dad was worm food, Dan said he doesn't process grief well. Then I started finding photos of Dan's late wife in weird places like my kitchen drawers and work bag. When I brought one to Dan, he got all emotional, saying he thought he'd lost this picture. That's when I realized Tim was planting them. I confronted him and he actually smirked at me, saying, "Dad should see Mom's face more often to help him remember what a real woman is like." Then came the 3 a.m. phone call. Tim's 3rd DUI, he'd hit a mailbox and fled the scene. Dan begged me to use Lisa's college fund again for bail and lawyers. I finally grew a spine and said no, suggesting rehab instead. Tim came home the next day after Dan borrowed from his brother. When I showed him some treatment programs, he lost it, saying, "You'd love to ship me off so you can play happy family with your replacement husband, wouldn't you?" Then continued, "At least I don't need to fondle some dead guy's jewelry to remember he existed. It's pathetic." I snapped back that what's truly pathetic is a 22-year-old man who can't take responsibility for his actions. Dan walked in and took Tim's side immediately, then accused me of being insensitive. When I held my ground, Tim stormed out, saying, "I know how to make you understand your place." Dan followed him to comfort him, leaving me standing there. Lisa came out asking, "Why does Tim matter more than us, Mom?" The next morning, everything changed. I went to do my ritual with Lisa, but Michael's ring was gone. My heart just dropped. I tore apart my room, searched everywhere, and asked Lisa, who said she hadn't touched it. By the time I realized what happened, Tim had supposedly left early for school, though he didn't actually attend anywhere. I spent the entire day sick to my stomach waiting. At dinner, Tim strolled in late and sat down like nothing happened. I asked about the ring, trying to keep my voice steady. He kept eating and said, "Oh, that? I pawned it this morning." He actually showed me the receipt on his phone for $400. He said, "You have my dad now. Keeping another man's ring is disrespectful to him. I did you a favor." The betrayal got worse when I realized Tim couldn't have known where I kept the ring. Dan admitted he'd told Tim about it months ago during some conversation about moving on. Lisa ran from the table crying and screaming, "He sold my daddy!" Dan's response was that maybe it was for the best, since it had been 6 years. That night, while Tim was out with friends, I searched his room, hoping he'd lied about the ring. Instead, I found his mother's jewelry box under his bed, full of her rings, necklaces, and watches. I went to the same pawn shop and asked about my ring. The guy told me it had already been sold, so I handed over the jewelry box and got $500. I spent every penny on Lisa's therapy and school uniforms. I kept every receipt. When Tim found out, he went absolutely ballistic, screaming, "Those were my mother's, you had no right." I stayed calm and said, "You have your dad. Keeping her things is preventing you from moving forward. I'm helping you heal." Dan just stood there frozen while Tim called me a bitch. Then Tim raised his hand to hit me and Lisa jumped between us, screaming, "Don't touch my mom!" Dan grabbed Tim's wrist and shoved him backward, shouting, "Not in front of Lisa!" His face showed the first crack in his denial I'd been waiting to see for months. The shock in his eyes told me he finally understood this wasn't just grief or adjustment issues anymore. Tim stumbled and caught himself on the counter. His eyes were dilated, clearly high on something. "You're choosing them over me just like always," he spat, his words slurring slightly. Lisa ran upstairs sobbing while I stayed frozen between the 2 men. Dan didn't follow Tim when he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. That was the first time Dan hadn't chased after his son. I found Lisa under her bed clutching her father's photo. "Is Tim going to hurt us?" she asked in a small voice that broke my heart. "No, baby. I won't let that happen," I promised, holding her tight while she cried into my shoulder. Downstairs, Dan sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "I can't do this anymore," he finally admitted, but he wouldn't make eye contact with me. The weight of those words hung between us. At 2 a.m., the pounding started. Tim was back, hammering on doors and windows, screaming obscenities about his stolen inheritance. His voice carried through the neighborhood as he yelled about how I'd turned his father against him and stolen what was rightfully his. Dan and I barricaded ourselves in our bedroom with Lisa, while the neighbors called the police about the disturbance. Lisa trembled between us, and for once, Dan didn't make excuses for his son's behavior. The police arrived to find Tim passed out on our lawn. The officer recognized him from previous arrests. "Third time this month we've dealt with him," he told us as they loaded Tim into the patrol car for public intoxication and violation of his bail conditions. Morning came with Dan calling in sick to work. I found him sitting in Tim's empty room, just staring at the walls covered in posters and photos of his late mother. The silence was deafening. I took Lisa to school, and her teacher pulled me aside. "Lisa's been falling asleep in class and seems very anxious lately. Is everything okay at home?" I gave a vague response about family stress, not ready to explain the chaos we were living through. Dan texted me that he was going to see a lawyer about Tim, but didn't specify what kind. When I got home, I noticed his wedding ring sitting on our dresser. My stomach dropped. Dan's brother Jake's car was in the driveway when I returned. I could hear them arguing about tough love through the window. Jake's voice was firm. "You're enabling him, Dan. You always have." Inside, Jake turned to me with sympathy in his eyes. "Tim called me from jail. He's claiming you planted substances on him and wants me to pay for a private attorney." Dan's face went pale. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Tim was arrested for theft during our honeymoon. I never told you. I handled it quietly." The room spun spun as more revelations poured out. Dan had been taking out credit cards to pay for Tim's expenses. We were $30,000 in debt. I felt sick as I realized how deep the deception went. Lisa's teacher called requesting a conference about her troubling drawings. She'd been drawing our family with Tim crossed out in black marker. The counselor was concerned about the violent imagery. Tim's public defender called next. Your stepson wants to press assault charges against you for the jewelry theft. He has photos of his mother's items as evidence. That's when it hit me. Tim had been documenting everything. There were photos of me in his room, recordings of our arguments. He'd been building a case against me for months. Dan's mother called crying from Florida. Tim had told her I was abusing Dan and isolating him from family. I'm driving up right now, she declared. My son needs me. The bank called about suspicious activity. Someone had tried to open a credit card using Lisa's social security number. The application originated from a jail computer. My hands shook as I realized the violation of trust. Dan admitted he'd given Tim Lisa's SSN months ago for a job application. I never thought he'd misuse it, he said weakly. I met with a divorce attorney who warned me that leaving now could impact custody of Lisa. Document everything, she advised. This is going to get messy. Dan found the attorney's business card and broke down. You're giving up on us too, he cried, not seeing the irony in his words after everything he'd hidden from me. Tim's cellmate's girlfriend started calling the house with threats. She demanded money for Tim's protection in jail. Dan wanted to pay. I refused. Our first real fight ended with Dan sleeping in Tim's room, surrounded by the remnants of his son's destructive life. The weight of our crumbling marriage pressed down on me as I lay awake, wondering how we'd gotten here. Lisa crawled into bed with me around midnight, seeking comfort I wasn't sure I could provide anymore. Dan's mother arrived the next afternoon in a whirlwind of perfume and judgment. She swept into our home without knocking, her eyes already scanning for evidence of my supposed cruelty. Where's my grandson? She demanded, ignoring my greeting entirely. He's still in jail, Dan said quietly from the couch where he'd been sitting since morning. Because of her, his mother spat, pointing at me. Tim told me everything, how you've been systematically pushing him out, turning his father against him. I watched Dan's face, waiting for him to defend me, but he just stared at his hands. His mother took his silence as agreement and launched into a tirade about how I'd destroyed their family. She mentioned consulting with a lawyer friend about grandparents' rights and protecting Tim's interests. Lisa came home from school to find her step-grandmother holding court in our living room. The woman's face transformed into a mask of sympathy. Oh, you poor dear, she cooed, pulling Lisa into an unwanted hug. Don't worry, Grandma's here now. That evening, Dan's mother insisted on visiting Tim in jail. She returned hours later with red eyes and a renewed fury. That poor boy is suffering because of your abuse, she announced. He told me how you've been tormenting him, flaunting your dead husband's memory, making him feel unwelcome in his own home. I tried to explain about the stolen ring, but she cut me off. Tim said you made that up to justify stealing his mother's precious jewelry. He has photos of everything that was in that box. The next morning, I couldn't find my journal. I'd been documenting everything as my lawyer suggested, keeping it hidden in my nightstand. By afternoon, photocopied pages appeared on my car windshield at work. My private thoughts about Dan's enabling behavior were highlighted in yellow. Notes in the margins called me unstable and vindictive. When I picked Lisa up from school, she was unusually quiet. Finally, she asked, Grandma says you might have to go away for being mean to Tim. Is that true? My heart shattered. What else did Grandma tell you? Lisa wouldn't meet my eyes. She said not to tell you about our talks. That evening during Lisa's birthday dinner, Tim called from jail. Dan answered immediately and put him on speaker so Tim could sing happy birthday. Lisa started crying, pushing her cake away. I don't want Tim to sing to me, she sobbed. Dan's mother scolded her. That's your brother trying to show he loves you. Don't be ungrateful. The prosecutor called the next day with an offer. Tim could avoid jail time by entering a rehabilitation program, but he'd need a stable home environment with family support. Dan jumped at the chance, agreeing before I could object. He'll have to wear an ankle monitor and live with us, Dan explained, avoiding my gaze. My name isn't on the house deed, I reminded him. You can't just move him back in without my agreement. Then maybe you should find somewhere else to stay, his mother suggested coldly. I discovered Dan had been meeting with Tim's addiction counselor without telling me. The counselor called to discuss family dynamics and mentioned that Dan had identified me as the primary trigger for Tim's relapses. Perhaps if you could be more accepting, she suggested. Jake called me aside during a tense family dinner. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. Dan asked me to record our conversations. He wants documentation of the family dynamic. He showed me his phone, revealing hours of recorded conversations. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been in AA for 10 years. I know enabling when I see it, and Dan's destroying everyone around him to avoid facing the truth about Tim. Lisa's school counselor called the next day. Lisa mentioned that Mommy and Daddy fight about Tim every night. As a mandated reporter, I had to contact CPS. The CPS worker arrived that afternoon, inspecting our home and interviewing each of us separately. She found no immediate dangers but noted significant family tension and recommended counseling. Dan's mother immediately offered to pay for therapy, insisting on choosing the therapist, her church friend who specialized in blended family reconciliation. Our first session became an ambush. The therapist, Dan, his mother, and even Tim via phone call all focused on my unwillingness to accept Tim as family. Lisa was forced to sit through it all, growing smaller in her chair as everyone discussed her mother's failings. Tim sent a letter from jail, supposedly apologizing. Dan framed it and hung it in the kitchen. The letter subtly blamed me for his actions, saying he acted out because he felt rejected and replaced. I hope we can start fresh when I come home, it ended. I'm not signing any agreement for Tim to return here, I told Dan that night. Then you're choosing to break up our family, he replied, his mother nodding approvingly from the doorway. Lisa's teacher called me directly the next week. Lisa told the class that her mom is making everyone leave like Daddy did. I'm concerned about what she's being told at home. I confronted Dan's mother, who was staying in our guest room for a bit. She admitted telling Lisa that I had made choices that led to Michael's death too. The child deserves to know the truth about her mother's pattern of driving men away, she said. Dan defended her when I demanded she leave. She's just worried about Lisa's well-being. Maybe you should listen instead of always being defensive. Work became my only escape, but even that was crumbling. My supervisor called me in after I missed an important deadline. I understand you're going through a difficult time time, but perhaps you should take some unpaid leave to sort things out. I couldn't afford unpaid leave, especially with Dan not working and our mounting debt, but my performance continued to suffer as the stress consumed me. Dan announced at dinner that he'd received a job offer in another state, where his mother lived. It's a fresh start for everyone, he said, presenting it as a done deal. The pieces clicked into place. Move near his mother, transfer Tim's probation there, isolate me from any support system I had here. I'd be completely alone, outnumbered, and dependent on Dan. That night, I opened my own bank account using my friend Sarah's address. I started depositing my paychecks there instead of our joint account. It felt like the first step toward freedom, even if I didn't know what came next. Dan discovered the account when mail was accidentally delivered to our house. You're planning to abandon us, he accused, waving the bank statement. I'll fight you for custody. No judge will give Lisa to a mother who's preparing to flee. Jake found me crying in my car after that fight. I need to tell you something else, he said gently. Dan's been meeting with a divorce attorney for weeks. He started before you did. He's planning to file first and claim abandonment. The reality hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been trying to save our marriage, Dan had been building a case against me. I couldn't afford a good lawyer with our debt, and legal aid said I made too much to qualify for free services. At Lisa's school play, Dan's mother loudly told other parents about my cruelty to poor Tim. She painted a picture of a vindictive stepmother who'd stolen from a grieving boy and turned his father against him. I watched other parents pull their children away from Lisa, whispering about our family problems. Lisa noticed immediately. Why is everyone being weird? She asked after the play. Emma's mom said she can't come to my sleepover anymore. I'm sorry, baby, I said, hugging her tight. This is your fault, she said, pulling away. You're embarrassing me. Why can't you just be nice to Tim? Dan moved his mother into Tim's room permanently while Tim was in jail. Just temporarily, he claimed, though she'd already redecorated and filled the closet with her clothes. I was now outnumbered in my own home. Every conversation a 3-against-1 battle. Tim's release date was set for 2 weeks away. Dan signed a lease on an apartment near his mother as a backup plan if you forced him out. The lease only had his name, and I discovered he'd used Lisa's college fund for the deposit. You stole from our daughter, I said, shaking with rage. I borrowed it for our family's future, he corrected, something you clearly don't care about. Lisa started having nightmares, waking up screaming about everyone leaving her. The therapist noted significant anxiety about family dissolution, but blamed it on my resistance to family unity. Tim called Lisa directly from jail one evening while I was in the shower. By the time I found her, she was in tears. Tim says he loves me and he's going to fix everything when he comes home, she told me. He says you're the reason everyone's sad. Dan's mother started buying Lisa expensive gifts, things we couldn't afford. New clothes, electronics, jewelry. Grandma says I can live with her if I want, Lisa mentioned casually. She has a big house with a pool. I consulted a lawyer about protecting Lisa. She explained that if Dan established primary residence in another state, he could potentially take Lisa with him. Document everything, she advised. But honestly, fathers with stable homes and extended family support often win these battles. Jake became my only ally, secretly recording Dan's conversations about filing for emergency custody once they moved. The plan was to claim I was mentally unstable, using my paranoid documentation and the CPS visit as evidence. Tim was released early for good behavior but went straight to his grandmother's hotel instead of the rehab facility. His ankle monitor allowed it, and Dan didn't object. He needs family support, Dan explained. At dinner, Dan announced he was taking the job offer. We're moving in 2 weeks. Start packing. Lisa and I aren't going anywhere, I said firmly. Then I'll be taking Lisa with me, he replied calmly. You're clearly not thinking of her best interests. She needs stability, not a mother who's falling apart. Lisa overheard the argument and locked herself in the bathroom. I wish everyone would just die like Daddy, she screamed through the door. Then nobody could fight anymore. I broke down the door with my shoulder, finding her curled in the bathtub, sobbing hysterically. I held her while she shook, whispering apologies and promises that everything would be okay. Dan stood in the doorway, shaking his head. Look what you've done, he said. She's falling apart because of your selfishness. His mother appeared with her phone, taking photos of Lisa's breakdown and my aggressive behavior in breaking the door. This is what that poor child deals with, she narrated to her phone. An unstable mother who breaks down doors and traumatizes her daughter. The next morning, Dan and his mother took Lisa to breakfast without telling me. They were gone for hours. When they finally returned, Lisa seemed confused and distant. Why don't you want us to be a family anymore? She asked me, clearly parroting words she'd been fed. I found Lisa's suitcase half-packed in Dan's mother's room that evening. They were planning to take her without warning, probably while I was at work. My hands shook as I repacked her things and hid the suitcase in my car. I called in sick the next morning and drove Lisa to school myself, warning her teacher about the potential custody issue. I provided my lawyer's number, explaining that Dan might try to pick her up without authorization. Dan's mother filed a missing person report when Lisa didn't arrive at her hotel after school. The police showed up at my workplace, questioning me about kidnapping while my coworkers watched. I explained the situation, but they seemed skeptical of my claims. When I picked Lisa up from aftercare, Dan and his mother were already there, claiming emergency contact status. The school administration seemed uncertain who had the right to take her. The principal called all parties to his office while Lisa watched everyone fighting over her. The stress triggered a panic attack. Lisa couldn't breathe, clutching her chest while tears streamed down her face. An ambulance was called, and I rode with her while Dan followed in his car. At the hospital, she clung to me, refusing to let go. The hospital social worker interviewed each of us separately. Lisa told her she just wanted everyone to stop fighting but wouldn't say who she wanted to live with. Her small voice broke when she admitted being scared of making anyone angry. Dan used the hospital visit to file an emergency custody motion, claiming I was causing Lisa psychological harm. I was served with papers right there in the waiting room, giving me 48 hours to respond or lose temporary custody. Jake offered to testify about Dan's manipulation, but warned it might not be enough. Courts often favored keeping children with biological parents, especially when they had stable homes and extended family support. I filed my own emergency motion, citing the theft of Lisa's college fund and Tim's violent behavior. My exhausted legal aid lawyer worked through the night helping me prepare, warning she'd seen this pattern before. While I was at the lawyer's office, Tim showed up at our house. Dan's mother let him in despite the restraining order. Neighbors saw him entering and called me, concerned about Lisa's safety. safety. I returned to find Tim's belongings back in his room. He'd showered and was acting like nothing had happened, his ankle monitor blinking on the dresser. Dan claimed Tim just needed to collect his things, but it was clear he was moving back in. The police said it was a civil matter since Dan had invited him. They couldn't enforce the restraining order on property where Dan lived and had given permission. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Lisa refused to get dressed, saying she didn't want to choose sides. I helped her into her clothes while she cried, both of us exhausted from the constant conflict. Dan arrived at court with his mother and an expensive lawyer. I had my overworked public defender who was juggling multiple cases. Tim appeared as Dan's character witness, clean-shaven and sober-looking, with no mention of his arrests. Dan testified that I'd created a hostile environment, presenting Lisa's drawings in the CPS report as evidence. He spoke about my obsession with my deceased husband and how it prevented our family from bonding. My lawyer presented evidence of theft, addiction enabling, and financial abuse. The judge seemed unmoved, more concerned with maintaining the family unit than addressing the documented problems. Lisa was interviewed in chambers. She came out crying, refusing to look at either parent. The judge's expression remained unreadable as she reviewed her notes. The judge granted temporary custody to Dan, citing his stable environment and extended family support. I was given supervised visitation twice a week and ordered to attend co-parenting classes with Dan. Outside the courthouse, Dan said this didn't have to happen while his mother smirked behind him. Tim waited in their car, already texting on his phone. I watched them drive away with Lisa, who pressed her small hand against the back window. Jake found me sobbing in the courthouse bathroom. He promised to help with the appeal, but we both knew the odds were against us. The system had failed to see through Dan's manipulation. 2 weeks passed before my first supervised visit. Lisa seemed distant, calling Dan's mother grandma, more than she spoke to me. She wore new clothes I hadn't bought, her hair styled differently than I'd ever done it. The visit ended with Lisa asking why I'd made Daddy choose Tim over us. Dan's narrative was complete. My daughter now believed I was the villain in our family's destruction. I documented everything during those supervised visits. Tim's increasing aggression toward Dan's mother when she wouldn't give him money. His violations of the ankle monitor that went unreported. The way Lisa flinched when he entered rooms. 6 weeks into the new arrangement, Tim stole his grandmother's credit cards. She'd finally seen his true nature when he drained her checking account for substance money. She called the police herself, crying as they arrested him. Dan called me that night, sobbing. His mother had kicked him out, refusing to enable Tim anymore. He'd lost his new job after missing too many days dealing with Tim's problems. Lisa kept asking when she could go home to mommy. The next arrest was for assault. Tim had attacked his grandmother when she refused to bail him out again. This time she pressed charges, providing photos of her bruised arms and broken belongings. Dan's carefully constructed image crumbled. His mother testified against Tim, admitting she'd been wrong about me. She told the judge how Dan had manipulated everyone to protect his son from consequences. During the appeal hearing, Lisa's therapist testified about the trauma of being separated from me. The teacher provided documentation of Lisa's declining grades and increased anxiety. Even the CPS worker admitted they'd been misled by Dan's family's coordinated story. Jake's recordings proved crucial. The judge heard Dan planning to file for custody before I'd even considered divorce. She heard him coaching Tim on what to tell authorities. She heard his mother strategizing about turning Lisa against me. The custody reversal came 3 months after the initial ruling. Lisa ran into my arms at the courthouse, sobbing apologies for believing the lies. But the damage was done. She had nightmares about being taken away again. Dan moved into a small apartment, his relationship with his mother destroyed. Tim got 5 years for assault and theft. Dan visited him weekly, still unable to accept that his enabling had led to this outcome. Lisa needed intensive therapy to process the trauma. She struggled with trust, constantly asking if people were lying to her. The therapist said it would take years to undo the psychological damage of the custody battle. I developed PTSD from the ordeal, jumping whenever someone knocked on the door. The financial devastation meant starting over completely. We moved to a smaller apartment in a different school district to escape the gossip. Dan sent letters asking for forgiveness, claiming he'd been manipulated too. I never responded. He'd chosen his addiction to enabling over the family who loved him, and that choice had destroyed everything. Lisa and I slowly rebuilt our life together. She kept her father's photo by her bed but stopped asking about the ring. Some losses couldn't be recovered. We learned to live with the scars, supporting each other through the healing process. The morning rituals never returned. That innocent tradition had been poisoned by Tim's cruelty and Dan's betrayal. Instead, Lisa and I created new traditions, smaller and quieter, built on the foundation of surviving together.